In the book of Job, ever since chapter 3, Job has been arguing against the misguided beliefs of his friends. 3 times he has rebuffed Eliphaz, and twice he has argued against Bildad and Zophar. After Job's third rebuttal to Eliphaz's challenge, Bildad once more speaks up. And in chapter 25, a very short chapter, Bildad represents all 3 of Job's friends in their defeat. Bildad the Shuhite responds to Job, and he says in verse 2, "Dominion and awe belong to God. God establishes order in the heights and the heavens. Can his forces be numbered? Upon whom does God's light not rise?" And then he asks a very important question in verse 4. He asks Job, how can a man be righteous before God? In other words, Job, if what you have said to us is actually correct, and we are wrong, then how can anyone be righteous before God? If retribution theology is a misplaced belief, if God does not reward the righteous and punish the wicked here in this life, then how can anyone stand upright before God? How can anyone be born of a woman and be pure? He goes on and he asks, if even the moon is not bright and the stars are not pure in God's eyes, then how much less a man who is but a maggot, a son of man who is only a worm? This is where Job's 3 friends have found themselves. Their belief that God does good for those who are good and God hurts those who choose to do wrong has left them thinking that human beings can be nothing more than maggots and worms. This is a very sad and terrible end to their belief. For what does it say about human existence? Bildad's question leads Job to one more discourse. Job's final argument is his longest, and beginning with chapter 26, Job replies to Bildad. He says, "Oh, how you have helped the powerless." Job is being very sarcastic in these opening verses. How you have helped the powerless, how you have saved the arm that is feeble. What great advice you have offered to the one without wisdom, and what great insight you have displayed. I mean, first, all 3 of you have argued that I am an awful human being, that I have done others terrible wrong, and I deserve to experience all this suffering. Now you have reached such a sad ending to your faith that you are pitiful. And so in verse 4, he asks, who has helped you to utter these ridiculous words? Whose spirit spoke from your mouth? The answer to Job's question can be found all the way back in chapter 4, in verses 12 through 16. In Eliphaz's opening speech, Job's first friend tells him that his misguided belief comes from a spirit that spoke to him during a dream. This is not the Spirit of God, because in chapter 42, God will tell Job that it is Job who spoke correctly and his three friends did not. So a deceiving spirit is what influenced Job's three friends. Job will now go on to describe the type of God that Bildad is asking who can stand up to. Who can be righteous before this God? So Job says, okay, let's see who this God is first, and then we'll answer that question. He says, the dead are in deep anguish. Those beneath the waters and all that live in them are in deep anguish. In the Bible, water is often a symbol for chaos. In verse 6, Job says, death is naked before God, and Abaddon the destroyer lies uncovered before God. For God spreads out the northern skies over empty space. He suspends the earth over nothing. He wraps up the waters, he wraps up the chaos in his clouds, and yet the clouds do not burst under their weight. He covers the face of the full moon and spreads out his clouds over it. He marks out the horizon on the face of the waters for a boundary between light and darkness. The pillars of heaven quake against his rebuke. In verse 12, Job says, by God's power he churned up the sea, which again is a reference to chaos. By his wisdom he cut Rahab to pieces. Rahab, in ancient mythology, was a chaos monster. By his breath the skies became fair, and his hand pierced the gliding serpent, yet another mythological chaos monster. These are but the outer fringes of God's work. How faint the whisper we hear of him, and then who can understand the thunder of his power? In other words, Job says, okay, Bildad, the God we're talking about is the God who went to war against chaos in the beginning of creation, who overthrew all the chaos monsters, putting them in subject under his control. This is the God we are trying to be upright with. So to answer your question, who can be righteous before this God? No one can. No one on his or her own ability can stand upright when faced with God's awesome power and presence. Nevertheless, Job is going to continue speaking. And so in chapter 27, Job now shares his final discourse. The Hebrew word here is mashal, and it refers to a long proverb or a taunt. Job is going to now taunt God. And before you point the finger at Job and think how awful Job could be for doing this, remember again, it is God himself who says that Job speaks correctly. So in chapter 27, Job takes up his final taunt of God. And he says in verse 2, "As surely as God lives, who has denied me justice?" So right off the bat, Job challenges God by saying, God, you are unjust. You've denied me justice. The Almighty has made me taste the bitterness of life. But as long as I have life in me, the breath of God in my lungs, my lips will not speak wickedness, and my tongue will utter no deceit. Job will not give up trying to argue his defense that he is innocent and has not deserved to suffer as he has. Nor will Job buy into his friend's foolish, misguided belief. In verse 5, he says, I will never admit that you, he's talking to his three friends, you are in the right. I'll never admit you're right. Until the day I die, I will not deny my integrity. Now, what did God say to Satan in chapters 1 and 2? Have you not seen my servant Job, who is upright? And Satan says, well, is he upright simply because you protect him? And that leads to all that we have been talking about in the book of Job ever since. And Job says, even now, I will not give up. Until the day I die, I will not deny my integrity. I will maintain my righteousness. And I will never let go of it. How far has Job come in his faith? In chapter 3, he wanted to die. He wanted to feel nothing. He wanted to be nothing. And now, his faith has grown so much that he says, I refuse to give up. It may not accomplish anything, but I will not give up. Until the day I die, I am going to be a man of integrity. I am going to be upright. My conscience will not reproach me as long as I live. He says, my enemies may be like the wicked, and my adversaries like the unjust. For what hope has the godless when he is cut off, when God takes away his life? Even if it doesn't happen in this life, but maybe the next? Who knows? Does God listen to his cry when distress comes upon him? Will he find delight in the Almighty? Will he call upon God at all times? Job says, I'm not going to be like the wicked. They don't call upon God. But you know what? Guess what I've been doing all along? I've been calling to God. God, answer. God, show up. Now in verse 11, he says to his three friends, I am going to teach you about the power of God and the ways of the Almighty. I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to reveal them to you. You have all seen this for yourself. You've seen it watching me. You've seen it listening to me. You've seen it everywhere else in life. And now he asks at the end of verse 12, why all this meaningless talk? And in verses 13 through the end of the chapter, Job now repeats the misguided belief of his three friends to show just how foolish and meaningless such a misguided belief is. And he goes on, he says, here is the fate God allows to the wicked. That's what you were all saying to me. This is what God does to the wicked. All right, if he has children, their fate is the sword. If there is a plague, it comes and it buries him. Even if he heaps up silver like dust and clothes like clay, well, the righteous, they wear them. His house is like a moth's cocoon. He lies down wealthy, but when he opens his eyes, it's gone. Terrors overtake him like a flood. A tempest snatches him away at night. The east wind carries him off. It hurls itself against him without mercy. It claps its hands in derision and hisses at him in its place. Job says, this is what you have been saying happens to a wicked person. But let me show you something else. Let me teach you true wisdom. And so in chapter 28, Job begins a wisdom chapter with his three friends. He starts out and he says, there is a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth and copper is smelted from ore. How do we know that? We know that because of experience. Someone found silver in the earth. Someone learned to refine gold. Someone took iron. And someone smelted copper. All of this is experience-oriented. So where does wisdom really come from? Not in foolish talk, but rather wisdom is founded upon experience. Job says, man puts an end to the darkness. He searches the furthest recesses for ore in the blackest darkness. Far from where people dwell, he cuts a shaft in places forgotten by the foot of man. Far from men he dangles and he sways. The earth from which food comes is transformed below as by fire. Sapphires come from rocks, and its dust contains nuggets of gold. All of this is a very natural progression. No bird of prey knows that hidden path, no falcon's eyes have seen it. Proud beasts do not set foot on it, and no lion prowls there. Man's hand assaults the flinty rock and lays bare the roots of the mountains. So we have the ability to reason out and think through our actions to accomplish something. Man tunnels through the rocks. His eyes see all its treasures. He searches the sources of rivers and brings hidden things to light. Verse 12, but where can wisdom be found? Where does understanding dwell? Man does not comprehend its worth. It cannot be found in the land of the living, because wisdom does not exist here on earth. Wisdom is far away, somewhere beyond. The deep says, it's not in me. The sea, the chaos says, it's not with me. So wisdom is not in all the chaos of the world. It cannot be bought with finest gold, nor can its price be weighted in silver. It cannot be bought with the gold of Ophir, with precious onyx sapphires. If we jump down to verse 20, Job says, where then does wisdom come from? Where does understanding dwell? Well, he's been arguing that it comes from experience. It comes from natural life. It is hidden from the eyes of every living thing, concealed from even the birds of the air. Abaddon the destroyer and death say only a rumor of it has reached our ears. But God understands its ways. God understands, and he alone knows where it dwells. So if you cannot gain wisdom by simply looking around and experiencing life, if you cannot reason it through in your mind, then only God knows how wisdom can be found. God understands the way to it, and he alone knows where it dwells. For he views the ends of the earth and sees everything under heavens, and when he has established the force of the wind and measured out the waters, when he made a decree for the rain and a path for the thunderstorm, then he looked at wisdom and appraised it, and he confirmed it, and he tested it. And he said to man, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. What did Job's friends fear? Job's friends feared the ash heap that Job has been sitting in. What did Job originally fear? He was terrified by God. Neither Job nor his friends actually moved into a stage of healthy, righteous fear, of such awe and wonder of God, that a desire in the heart was created to follow in the footsteps of such a God. Now Job continues in chapter 29. How I long for the months gone by, for the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and by his light I walked through the darkness. In other words, oh, how I long for the days when I was innocent, and I didn't know by experience all the hardships of this world. How many of us long for those childlike days where we didn't have to worry about when and where the next bills would be paid, and how to endure all the persecution or the suffering that we go through, the pain of loss and hard work and then more loss. We simply enjoyed the innocence of life. Oh, for the days when I was in my prime, Job says, when God's intimate friendship blessed my house, when I was ignorant in my faith, when I had that disinterested faith of God gives, God takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord, and I felt nothing. And the Almighty was still with me. Oh my, and my children were all around me. When my path was drenched with cream, and the rock poured out for me streams of olive oil. Signs of prosperity. Cream and olive oil. How we all long for the days when everything was going well. He says, verse 7, when I went to the gate of the city and I took my seat in the public square, the young men saw me and stepped aside out of respect, and the old man rose to their feet out of respect, and the chief men refrained from speaking out of respect, and covered their mouths with their hands out of respect, and the voices of the nobles were hushed out of respect, and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouths out of respect for me. But nobody respects me anymore, because here I am, sitting on an ash heap, covered in filthy clothes. Whoever heard me spoke well of me, and those who saw me commended me. And this is why, and again, Job is maintaining his integrity, that he is an upright person. He says in verse 12, because I rescued the poor. Now, what did Eliphaz say to Job? Initially, Eliphaz said, Job, yes, you rescued the poor. Then Eliphaz reversed his statement and said, Job, you're an awful wicked person because you forgot the poor. Job says, no, I rescued the poor. I rescued those who cried out for help. I was a father to the fatherless who had no one to assist them. The man who was dying would bless me because I made the widow's heart sing. I helped the widow. I took care of the poor. I put on righteousness like clothing. Justice was my robe and my turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy. I took up the case of the stranger. I broke the fangs of the wicked and snatched the victims from their teeth. Now, what's interesting in all of this is that none of these acts does Job ascribe to God. So essentially, in Job's taunt, he says, in my integrity and uprightness, I have actually acted better than God has towards me. Job thinks he's done everything that should be rewarded according to his friend's misguided belief. But where is the response? Where is the response from his community? Where is the response from his own wife now? Where is the response from God? He says, I thought, I will die in my own house. My days are numerous as the grains of sand. My roots will reach to the water, and the dew will lie all night on my branches. My glory will remain fresh in me. The bow ever new in my hand. Men listened to me, expectantly waited in silence for my counsel. After I had spoken, they spoke no more. My words fell gently on their ears. They waited for me as for showers. When I smiled at them, they scarcely believed it. The light of my face was precious to them. I chose the ways for them and sat as their chief. I dwelt as a king among his troops. I was like one who comforts mourners. Unlike his three friends, who were awful comforters. Verse 30, Job says, but now all these people mock me. Men younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to put with my sheepdogs. Of what use was the strength of their hands to me, since the vigor had gone from them? Haggard from wanton hunger, they roamed in parched land and desolate wastelands at night. In the brush they gathered salt herbs, and their food was the root of the broom tree. They were banished from their fellow men, shouted at as if they were thieves. They were forced to live in dry stream beds among the rocks and in the holes in the grounds. They brayed among the bushes and huddled in the undergrowth. A base and nameless brood. They were driven out of the land, and now their sons mock me in song. I have become a byword to them. Job says, all these people that I have tried to help, I tried to be an upright, righteous person. All these people now look at me as an example of what happens to the wicked. In our next study, we'll pick up with chapter 30, verse 10, as we continue to look at Job's final discourse and taunt towards God. God bless.